Welcome back. I hope most of you were able to connect with the people you wanted in the morning. We are going to continue with the breaking news theme, but focus more on the editing side and how to structure, think about your stories, but as an editor. Um, we are excited to have our afternoon panelists. Uh, on the left most is Chris Winans. Chris spent 21 years in journalism, including 10 years at the Wall Street Journal as an editor. And then Chris has also worked in local media in New Jersey, including at the Trentonian, and then at the Philadelphia Journal. He also has spent 7 years with media relations at insurance companies, and most recently, has been a communications consultant. Welcome, Chris. Um, we introduced Jill earlier this morning, but worth repeating, she is the former science and bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. And before that, she wrote the numbers column for 8 years that explored the data behind topics. And also, she was part of the journal talent team and helped us hire interns and other reporters. I have Corey. Corey Shooten most recently was Crane's New York Business's editor-in-chief. He will also work with the journal in senior newsroom roles, including our newsletter editor. And before that, he was with the Columbia Journalism Review. A huge round of applause for all of you for being here. Thank you so much. Oh, all yours.
Okay. I sort of initially thought we would have different groups, but I'm happy to see everybody is here for both panels. I'm going to start with the same question from the morning panel, because I think the editors might vary a little bit. So the first thing I want to talk about is some kinds of breaking news happen again and again. You've got storms, you've got fires, you've got shootings and other things. What steps can an editor or best take to be what should have already been done before anything happens?
Well, it, certainly an editor needs to have reporters who are well sourced. Editor has to make sure that he's got reports that are cultivating relationships all along. Uh, that also have a clear idea of who's got the strengths in the various topics, whether it's climate or other specific topics that got to prove reliable that to get there. But when it comes to breaking news, it's the reporter that's cut step up to the plate.
Okay.
I would add that no matter what your assignment in a newsroom is, if your approach is I'm a beat reporter, you can actually succeed at any assignment. So, like an editor, for instance, you're thinking about the resources that are around you in the newsroom. You're thinking about the same kind of things you might approach a story. Who are the characters, the people? Like, who do we need to reach? Where's the data? Um, Databases, like public relations professionals. And then the third is the history or the context, right? So if you're tackling a story, you know all of those resources. And say it's a storm or say it's police, it's an ongoing story, like say Delaney Hall, for instance. You have like Google Docs for each of those. Like you have sort of a plan and a strategy approach. You know your people, and you know who the best people to turn to in that moment.
I'm going to follow up with you, Corey, because when we talked the other day, you said something that I found interesting. You said an editor should treat their reporters like they are a beat. And I think you were talking a little bit about what Chris was alluding to also about knowing your reporters. Can you expand on that and how that mindset might help others?
Yeah, I mean, I think of reporters as a B, um, partly for like a management strategy, how to relate with someone and understand the right way to manage a reporter. If you're an editor or manager, you know what their strengths are, you know what their goals are, you know what their aspirations are. So you also know there are some reporters that love a hands-on edit. They really want to mix it up and like have you suggest a lot of things and be a little more aggressive. Some want a regular check-in. Some reporters need a little therapy, like as they're reporting a story, right? They might just want to bounce a few ideas and then they're set and then they go. So understanding the reporter that you're working with But I think from an actual newsroom management and strategy perspective, also knowing who is best at writing something right away, really quickly. Who's best at kind of finding the human element. Like every newsroom has someone who's great at door knocking or talking to people and drawing out those stories. So drawing on those strengths, like in a big story situation, you sort of know who your people are and who should do what.
Yeah, I think that's probably the first thing that you think about as an editor is when there's brand new story breaking. The first thing you think about is who's drawing that one.
That's great. Okay, so it's happening. News is breaking. We talked this morning about what reporters should be doing, but what should the editors be doing at that moment when you find out something is afoot? You might not even know exactly what it is yet, but there's the germ of we're in it. We are in it. So what do the editors do? Or you want to pick it up?
Yeah, sure. So what I would say first is you take a deep breath and you stay calm, because the best thing an editor could be is not like freaking out or not anxious or not kind of losing it. Like take in the information slowly. You know there's multiple sources, and I think start marshaling those. Right. So in a Slack environment, you might start a Slack thread with a photographer, a breaking news reporter, that are maybe a couple of people that are likely to be the group that's on that story,
All in the same thread.
all in the same thread. And then you could add people in and kind of develop a team based on what you learn. But I think one of the most important things in that sort of first blush of breaking news is not duplicating and creating chaos internally. I think a couple of things that can create chaos with breaking news is if you have a story that clearly covers multiple beats and they have multiple editors, it's unclear who's running that. So I think identify who the lead is. If you're going to have someone that handles rewriting and takes information and is gathering it together, maybe there's reporters that are feeding someone to do a rewrite. But I'm getting a little sprawling here, but essentially is take a deep breath and assess how you're going to tackle it.
The other thing that the editor has to do is already start to create in their own mind. What's the story? How should the story be organized? What are the most important elements? There's lots of different elements for different kinds of stories. And as long as the editor knows exactly which bases need to be covered, then it's easier to figure out who's got covered.
So let me ask you, as you raised an interesting point, but especially with breaking news, it can cross beats. From an editor's perspective, and it obviously it depends on how large the staff is and what your resources are as far as personnel. But how do you marshal? You've got it's crossing this, you've got multiple editors and they feel territorial or not, they go collegial. How do you wrangle that?
I think, especially in a small publication, make it the patsy to make the busy person get down to work because they're the ones that need to get things done. That doesn't also serve you very well. It's going to upset that person because they're being overloaded. They're being punished for being really good at what they do. But rather than do that, take that person, deputize them to help organize.
So they're the point first.
Yeah.
That's a bit.
Don't dump the whole thing on one person just because they have to be instead.
I mean, I would build on that too, because I think the better that you know your newsroom within your team, most newsrooms have like someone that's really, really good at planning, and either they may just be good at it but don't want to do it all the time.
Yeah.
So you do have to identify that, right? But I mean, take for instance the upcoming World Cup. Like, there's all sorts of possibilities that could come out of that. We don't have to get into all the details there, but having a coverage plan and a strategy, having like a go-to person that owns that, builds it out. Here's our contact list if anything happens. What are the key threads? I mean, the key thread, obviously, for the World Cup is transit, because it's extraordinarily expensive. Like, there's another fire at Penn Station. So if you're running a newsroom and it's not just being responsive to breaking news, it's actually planning,
right,
and thinking ahead of what could happen. Like, we don't know what could happen with transit, but we know transit is a critical issue to the World Cup.
I think that's a really good point, and we touched on that this morning. That yes, breaking news is urgent, immediate. It's happening. You're reporting on it in the moment, but you also can be cognizant of what you need to be paying attention to, and you can do some preparation to be ready for the thing. The subway goes down or something worse happens. What have you, and to be thinking ahead. It sounds weird to prepare for breaking news, but you really ought to be preparing for breaking news, I think.
That's the center of the business.
Yeah. You also, I think it was you. So honestly, I got it mixed up. So maybe someone here mentioned the other day when we were chatting, just sort of like the back end technical things, like get a container ready. And so just, you've got to collect the information. You also have to push it out. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the terminology that the Wall Street Journal used, not just kept it. I think every user might call it something different, but I think you think about what is the first hacks. The audience wants to know the latest we know right away. So um, don't wait for a fully baked story. If we know 3 paragraphs, like here's the bare bones, this will be updated. Get it live. Like have something that you're working. So I do think that having a container for the news takes a little bit of that pressure to create a perfect news story before you start pushing it out, before you start going to social. Because our value to the community is reliable, accurate information quickly.
What's in the container? Like you're setting it up. What is it? A working idea for a headline? Like how do you structure that?
Well, I think that in our content, like whatever your content management system is, I'm referring to a container as like a story that you build on the back end in the newsroom.
Okay.
Um,
So it's your budget line.
well, I would say it's a story that's ready to go live. Like I would take a story live, but on a major story, 3 or 4 paragraphs. Sort of think a little bit like a wire service of Bloomberg mic.
Okay.
So it's ready for public consumption, but we know that it's going to continue to update. We're going to try to keep people more.
Got it. So you get something short and accurate out as quickly as possible. And and then you can add to that and adjust as needed.
No, it's just I in a way, the way news is produced now, not so much on paper, not so much waiting for 5 o'clock the 9 all day long. To me, it's like a luxury that everybody's now operating like a wire service. So it's now because you can go out with a sample or it and then build from there. It's one of the things I like about things being electronic.
I like waiting. To back up a little bit, a little bit, you were talking about having your strategy, and I think it would be useful for the editors, especially to hear what are you developing that strategy on the fly? Do you have things that are just in your strategy toolbox that are your go-tos? Like, how are you strategizing for an event like this?
Well, I think from an editor's perspective, like you are a couple things, right? You are an advocate and a supporter of reporters, but you're also an advocate of the audience. So I think that's why I say you approach everything like a beat. Like I want to know if I'm working for a news organization, I want to know what the numbers are. Like who is the audience here? What do they need? When do they need it? What platforms are they using? Like, so having a sense of the numbers and what might appeal to them, where they're reading is going to help inform the investment of the resources. So, yeah.
So is your strategy partly what are we pushing out on social media right away? What are we getting up on the website, on mobile? Is that part of the strategy? Is just thinking about how to reach the different audiences?
Yeah. So I teach a business and media course, and one of the things I advocate for is every single piece of content. We've wrestled with that terminology sometimes, right? Like it's a story, but piece of content can have its own business model. And I think thinking in those terms can help you identify an audience, specifically what they need and where they need it. Because depending on your outlet, you may really like it. It may be really useful if it's on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Others, it's going to be like not necessary at all. It's going to be general and it's more social. So it depends on the
And some people just want the news alert.
exactly.
Questions that we got from somebody who's attending here. And what do you do for reporters when you're also putting pressure on post on social? And my answer to that is, and I'm really curious what you think, should that be the editor's job? Because reporters should be focused on reporting and doing basic writing, but then they have to turn around and figure out how to revise it, to post it on LinkedIn, wherever else, socially. I mean, it means putting that burden on reporting and do both things. I think is a little
Yeah, and I guess
fragmenting.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think I would say the better that you understand your reporters. Um, I'm doing some work right now with Gotham's and WNYC, and so trying to get a sense of like which reporters really love to go on radio. Like if NPR reaches out and wants a reporter, like some reporters, it's going to be like a heavy lift and an additional thing, but a lot of reporters, they don't want someone to gatekeep that opportunity like for a broader audience. So some of it is like feeling out where people excel,
What they're comfortable with.
what they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to toss in a little anecdote. I meant to print this out and I forgot to do that. So double check me on the exact details. But this year's Pulitzer Prize winner for breaking news, I think, was the Denver Post, and it was a shooting, I believe, that happened. And the social media connection is their strategy was to they flooded the zone with reporters. They had the reporters tweet, I believe, fact check sentences. On the back end, they had someone in the newsroom on staff assembling that information and weaving it into the beginning story. So they made a conscious, I have to assume they had given this a thought before breaking news was happening, but I thought that was interesting. And just, I mentioned this in my breakout session, just as an aside for anybody that's curious to see how other organizations attack breaking news. A lot of the Pulitzer winners and entries, which are available online, provide TikToks for exactly what happened in the course of reporting out the breaking news. It's really interesting. So that's where I had seen that. So all right, you've got a strategy. You've prepared yourself ahead of time because you know certain things are going to happen, or it's the World Cup. Did you say is going on? It's happening, and you're thinking about what could break. What should we be doing? But now, you're in it. You've launched. The reporters have been launched, one or more. You've taken those immediate steps to get the ball rolling on this event, whatever it is. What do the editors do next? Have a cup of coffee? I don't think so.
Well, I know it's a journal. It used to be there was two kinds of editors. One were the news editors who represented the interests of the reporter, and then desk editors who represent primarily the readers. Once that story has had life breathed into it, the news editors become sort of the defenders of the work that the reporters have done, and also keeps that reporter going to keep digging, because once your story is out there, your competition is reading.
Right.
And so you have to get on top of what's going to be a unique take on this story. That's just in terms of the reporting. And then you have these other editors who are focused on making sure that the article reads real smooth, breeze through it, but to get to the good point. And they're there to take another swipe at the editing, see if they further tighten up straight line.
I think that's a really good point, and that's a newsroom like the Wall Street Journal is a whole lot of people. So depending on the size of the organization or the resource, you might have to wear both hats. Right? Like you might have to advocate for the reporter as well as the audience. But I also think that I'll keep coming back to this, like a calm sense of perspective to the extent possible. Like you might get it's not the worst thing to like, touch grass occasionally, like as you're working on a breaking story, you can keep a bit of a sense of perspective in one's net. I have like some odd ways of describing like how editors work, but I also think like good editors are like They can get up to 30,000 feet, but they also know how to land the plane, right? So I think, if you're working on a breaking news story that involves crime or something with the police department, you might have your police reporter on that initially. And the editor ideally is kind of keeping an eye on potential impacts on other news. Like how does this affect some event that's coming up, or
What's the second day story?
it's the second day story. Exactly. It starts thinking about like how do we spin this forward
They're kind of like the traffic cop at that moment.
a little bit. I don't really want to make an air traffic control thing because that's kind of a mess of an agency right now, but you really are.
The best editors are the ones who look at everything that reporting, sees the subtle, missing, but super important element. And there's always one, at least one.
Excellent point.
Okay. So you're kind of storyboarding mentally, I guess, too. You're kind of developing what you hope is going to be coming into you.
Yeah. And asking, okay, is this still the right lead?
Right. Okay. So the copy is arriving. Nice segue. Perhaps in fragments. What are your tips for the editors to structure the incoming material and to ensure its clarity? Maybe we start with structure. And I think part of this has to do with the strategy of how you want the reporters to file. And I think in the environment we have today, there probably does have some nuance depending on how your news organization publishes. Maybe you're online only. But what about the structuring this data or this these story pieces or fragments that are coming in?
Is this the hot mess question?
No.
Wow.
That's the very last.
You have to start with keep your eye on the ball. What is the most important point? Build it from top to bottom with whatever you have, and be ready and willing to include in the first story what you don't know, who you could, what that make.
You mean it to state that out right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and so could not be
Very sure. Yeah, you should understand about what you know, what you still need to find out.
And when we were talking the other day, you also talked about the Blundell method.
Yeah.
And the 7 elements of a story to be thinking about. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the Phil Blundell was page 1 editor at the Wall Street Journal years ago. He developed a course, feature writing specifically for page 1. And he said that to start off with, there are always going to be about 7 key elements in most stories. Some stories have different steps, but the main one is the main that includes not necessarily its order. What's the history? What's the background of what you're writing about? What's the scope of the quantifiable, regional? What are the reasons behind what you're seeing? What is happening? What are the impacts? What's happening? What are the countermoves? Who's doing what in response? Of course, what's the future? What are the possible ramifications?
And there are also 3 proof points, which obviously you're not going to get all of this in a really fast and a breaking news environment, but it's still worthwhile thinking about the 3 proof points.
Yeah, 3 proof points he says is we need to have for each of these 7 sections, 1 anecdote, one statistic, and 1 quotable killer insight. So, and he would say, you don't need 2 of any of them. Just best one for action scene in the Wall Street Journal Reporter. Set up 7 elements, 3 subs, and this would guide the reporter so that he would make the calls to get that anecdote And once you got that anecdote they like, cut it off, go on to the next bucket. But that's kind of the starting point for how to develop it. We'll overall on take one in the future.
And I think it has lessons for working quickly too, just for things that one to get. And to back up from it, it occurs to me, thinking back to when I was a young reporter first starting, that one of the most valuable things the editors brought was that knowledge. They knew the history.
Yeah.
You know, I'm brand new to a town. I don't know the players that this editor really knows very well and can prep the reporters and really tutor the reporters. I think that's a really important role. For you had talked about looking for the gems, the hidden gems in the draft to get.
So once the story arrives, like hopefully you already know some of the gems. If it's a breaking news situation, you might not have had as many pre-conversations with a reporter. Um, but the number of times that there's something fantastic like lower in the story or a little bit later, I find often in drafts, like there's a certain pressure when you're at the top of the story. And then when you're building a little more cavalry, you're filling in some of the backstory with like your own writing. Like, if you're at the gym, you're a little more warmed up. And sometimes there are nuggets or there's something that can really bring a sense of pop or color up higher. So looking for those elements of humanity, something that's going to make our story like different or stand apart. Yeah, and I think I want to build on this bit, the format of the story. I think one of the cool things about our industry right now is that everyone is like breaking all those rules. Yeah, creating new formats all the time. I mean, Axios is an entire business built around essentially like a way to get, what do they call it? Smart brevity or smart brevity, which is, we all like, a lot of people kind of chuckled at that when it first came out, but like, it's a new way of sharing information, new format, for facts and data and everything else. And so I think no matter if you're a reporter, you're an editor, anywhere you are in the news business, continue to think about, and your beat, and continue to think about, how do I organize information a little bit differently that might serve an audience that didn't know they needed it.
Particularly an online audience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
On the gems thing, the best gems often are the ones that the reporter didn't include in the story.
But they talk about that.
They talk about it because it's so precious to them.
I love that. Thank you for calling it out, because that's why even in like tight deadline situations, having a conversation is great, because people will naturally talk about things most interesting, even if it goes.
And the editor's jobs just sit there and go, well, what about this? What about that? And at some point in that kind of a conversation, the reporter's going to go, oh, you know what I heard that was really, and then they tell you something that's not in the story, but actually is pretty. The Axios you mentioned, the way they organize things is with very explicit, bold-faced readings. What's happened? Why it matters. One picture, the backstory, write it up. Those are the main. But it's organized. Check it out.
I think the lesson is the same. Blundell had his system. This is another system. But if you develop, and you don't have to stick to it every single time, but then have a few ways that you like to structure information, and perhaps particularly for breaking news, it's just useful to have thought about that.
One of the things that I find myself attracted to in terms of how news is being presented is those quick hit, straightforward, fact-based headlines followed by 3 quick bullets, rather than a lead paragraph. Then you get to the lead paragraph.
I think Christy had also talked about, as far as structuring, is the information positioned appropriately? And the example you had used is, you've got a crime, shooting, whatever, and you have something brief, but at the very end, the person says, but I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Can you tell the structuring that?
Yeah, this is going back to the core concept of what do journalists do with information? They try to present it fair, balanced, accurate way. It's got to be factually accurate. It's got to be balanced, meaning both sides of the story, or all sides of the story, are being told and represented. But fairness means giving each voice in the story the right position, rather than you start off with a headline that so and so has been arrested allegedly for doing X. And in your example, putting that X's point of view at the bottom, you're giving the defendant's comment at the bottom. It's cheating them out of, because not everybody reads all the way through the story. So anybody reads halfway through the story, well, they'll probably then say it. But that's the, and also there's a tendency to avoid any story that seems to go on the one hand, on the other. Sometimes what happens when you put everybody's side in a story, but you have to be fair. You can't not put something in a story because it doesn't match up with your preconceived notion.
We'll get to that doing my Thursday. But I don't think you're talking about like not false equivalency, but appropriate representation.
Right. That's right.
Did you want to add in?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. So clarity. That was mostly about structure. Of course, we've got a nice structure, but the story needs to be clear as well, no matter how short or long. What are your hot tips, Corey, for integrating clarity?
Well, I think that if you're an editor and you come across a sentence that is unclear, 9 times out of 10, it's because it's unclear to the work and they're like writing around it a little bit. So I would say that, like, when you self-edit sentences, might have to do a little more reporting. Like, there might be a fact that's missing. There's not a subject and verb in something actually happening. You might be trying to write around it. But I do have like should I go through my
Do it.
list?
Yeah.
So one of the first things that I like to check for, and this is a theory that I think stands up most places I work, is so much work goes into the story, and I think the headline sometimes is an afterthought. So I always say, like, does the headline do the story justice, and does the story back up the headline? Is there a true match between the headline and story? And I found so many stories that are like just great, and I'm like, this deserves a great headline.
So we might, because I have some sections that are going to complement that. I'm just going to skip around and we'll expand on that as we go. So headlines, and we'll go through the whole. What must a good headline accomplish, and does it differ with breaking news?
Well, it's not breaking news. It has to be true. That's the big.
Let's stick with what does breaking news need to do? A breaking news head.
Tell you exactly what happened.
I think what happened, where it happened, a forward spin. You can make that. It's not always possible. Cleanup continues or cleanup begins after massive storm. I think the more an active verb like that you can get in there, the better. I also think every news organization should think strategically about what should be in the headlines. I mentioned WNYC earlier. Like, every one of their headlines has to have a place, like a borough, New York, New Jersey, like that's to that big line. So I think depending on what the strategy is of your organization, have a headline, standardize some parts of your headline.
Did you have anything with it? So some moves we chatted about before are keep it short, to the point. Something big has happened. You don't need to flower up the headline. Fire burns down City Hall.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
The shorter the better. Make sure the headline and the story match. Like, the headline can't promise something that the story doesn't deliver. Right. And it's maddening for the reader when that happens. And basically, whatever the headline promises, the story needs to deliver. The story's coming first, so you got to match the headline to the story, no matter what you hoped you were going to get, right? I'm not sure what this meant, but I jotted down for our conversation Bloomberg's rule: the headline is the product.
Oh yeah, like for wire service, the headline and first
I said it's like the flash news.
the flash shot is the entire product.
So your tweet is this story or similarly.
It's clickable.
Yeah, like does it get the information out accurately?
Yeah, and along those lines, by the way, your headline.
Yeah. If I was going to say related to all of this, what should you avoid in a headline?
Adjectives, adverbs,
I-
clauses.
I've heard some editors have just refused to do puns in headlines. I'll never be a strong ban against puns, but I think they can be overdone. I think as conversational as possible and matching the tone and the energy of the story, if you will, right? So like, don't put a feature headline on a hard news story. Like, I think you're signaling something to the audience. And we've all seen these headlines. They are still going on, even in the post BuzzFeed era. Headlines that are over promising what's in the story, or don't do some sort of like, you'll never believe, like, how this person survived on $5 an hour and now owns a home. And then at the end of the story, it's their parents gave them $500,000.
Every time this week too.
Every single time. Never fails.
I
was thinking CNBC on that one.
Okay. That exact story.
Exactly, that's right.
There is a lot of false advertising headlines online.
Yeah. Sorry. What was next? So here, let's. Oh, sorry. That's okay.
It's funny. I have to refer to my notes here. Oh, we talked about this, and I is it fair? And then I would just totally agree with you. I love a story that shows to work, because I do find that sometimes reporters will leave out something because they don't have the full story on it. So like, I would encourage them to include an interesting nugget. But if we don't know, for instance, how many people are affected by it, we could say it's unclear. Like, I think showing work is real good and is part of Hairless.
Okay. So you've asked the question. If you got an answer, probably in there. If you didn't get an answer, it can be worthwhile to say, I actually did try to find this out, dear reader, and was unable to get it at this point.
Exactly. So
I see a lot of coverage now where we made a call, we sent an email, and we got to them. They did get back to it. Yeah. Because otherwise, the reader can be left to us. No, I didn't try.
I see.
yeah. Well, like, I'll give an example of that. I mean, we all live in like a very transit dense area. So like, you have a story about some disruption to transit. If the agency hasn't said yet when they expect it to reopen, um, like, it's useful information to the audience to know, is rush hour, is the train going to be running again by rush hour? So like, if they haven't said that, a line in the story that says New Jersey Transit has not said yet whether it will reopen by rush hour, will actually be useful, because it gives them an impetus to check back or say, well,
Right.
no.
Especially if you're on the other end from your home. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. What was next on your list?
Next on the list was one of my favorites. As a business reporter and a business journalist for most of my career, so much of our journalism doesn't have numbers in it, and it absolutely has to. There's no excuse to have a story without numbers, because there's a quantification of how many people are affected. There's people with financial interests on all sides. Any legislation or policy is going to have a financial impact. So I think, like, pretty much every story you come across, whether you're reporting or editing, should have some numbers in it.
Which is another way of saying context.
Build right along with the anecdotes and the other stuff.
Back is your. I don't want to pet your list.
So the last one that I'll mention was, and this is just something that kind of you'll see in patterns, is don't raise a question that you don't answer. Right? Think like, and I reporters. There's a tendency sometimes to rely over on links. I don't know if that was also bringing up.
No, this is a good time to talk about.
Where someone will fill in the backstory with just a hyperlink to the old story. And I always say, let's give the reader 4 or 5 words that says what that bill or that legislation did. You give them the option of click for more, but don't require them to get the context by going elsewhere, send it elsewhere. So I think that's one way not to raise questions. We don't We don't want the reader to get to the end of your story and say, "Oh, I don't know this, this, this."
But you don't want to set them away.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a quick aside, we kind of went off on a tangent on links, but maybe you would find it interesting. Like, when do you use a link? How do you use a link? When are they useful? When are they not useful? And not using them to make the reader do too much work as an example. Maybe not the greatest use of the link. It's good to have the link, but you don't want the reader to have to follow the link to understand the story that's in front of them. Another thing we talked about is, what do you link to? Like an entire sentence, one word, and we had a little bit of back and forth about that. So,
Well, I don't think you want to link to something that's massive. That's ideally you want to link to something that's in your publication.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, keep them in your house. But the Axios, I think, has a tendency to tell their story and they leave the suggestion for a link at the bottom where it says, find out more.
So I get and appreciate linking to stories that your own organization has produced. But if you're citing a document and you can link to that document, I find that very useful. What I dislike with links is when the link takes me to something accessible. Why are you linking me to this? Yeah, but otherwise, I think links have a useful place, but should be deployed strategically.
I mean, when I read stuff, what I will almost always like to gives a story about a lawsuit really fed to the publication by one side or the other. So you don't necessarily get both sides, but then if there's a link to the actual litigation, that's what happens.
Yeah.
Then I can make my own judgment. Is this story slanted one way or the other?
We talked this morning, as you all know, about accuracy and what reporters should do, and reporters are the front line, and editors trust you to get it right. But editors still have some responsibility, and I'd like to hear what your recommendations are for how editors should instruct reporters to file their copy to instruct the reporters to file their copy to maximize speed and accuracy, and what editors can contribute to that.
Well, number one, I had a story that is heavily dependent on unnamed sources. Red flag. An editor has to find out who are those sources. Credible are they? Why do they have to be? Sometimes, they have to ask who it is. But they share the responsibility to keep it confidential. But at that point, the editor is the reader's advocate. You have to look at every single fact of the story and be skeptical about how accurate can this be. It's kinds of things to watch out for. I stumble across occasionally. Story that says blah blah blah, sources said. And if you dig in, you find out how this experience that people just want source. Or there's somebody in the story quote where the company will say that said that they didn't have any comment, but they spoke to the reporter off the record. The reporter used that as a source. That's a lie. So that's the kind of thing that editors are at the front line on behalf of the readers to provide accuracy. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Like, how many people are editors here now? How many people are interested in becoming an editor? How many people work with editors? How many people are sometimes annoyed with their editor? No, I completely agree with that. I think there's a
You have to be an irritant.
well, I think it's sort of a to be a good editor, I think you have to fundamentally love reporters, first of all, right? Like you have to believe in the mission and be fired up about it, and realize that you really are wearing two hats. Like but they're both serving the reporter, because like thinking about the audience and protecting the institution means you're also protecting the reporter. Like, and reporters over time are going to start trusting the editors that like catch them or guide them or direct them to some more context, or say, help them avoid a correction. So I think it's both the protection side of it, and it's also the elevation. So like if you're the best editors, I think, are able to try to straddle both. Like protect, look out, add context that makes the story more bulletproof from a legal perspective or perceived fairness, but also finding opportunities to elevate so that more people read it. And reporters, we all love it when our stuff gets read or goes viral. Makes a difference.
I want to a few things from our conversation. We're sort of saying this together, but put it another way, the editor needs to be a skeptical reader. And that is to the benefit of their reporter. And you need to be a skeptical reader, even when you're Fed's most trusted reporter, because it's a good editor. You should look for the holes. Who does one side of the story, one player's side of the story appear to be missing? What isn't there that virtually any reader is going to read and say, what about this? If you read the story and you have well, what about this? You probably need to answer that question in the story or address it in some way. I think this was one of my favorites. I don't remember who said that. Editors need to be adept at changing focus, because editors, like reporters, may come in with a preconceived idea of what they believe is going to be the literature of the news, and it might not be that. So you have to let the reporting get in the way of your preconceived idea. The reporting is what counts. You should make sure in your reading that the reporters gave everyone in the article a chance to respond. That should be apparent. And if it's not apparent, that's something to follow up in, I don't know, in your conversations with the reporter. Attributions. Are you showing the work and how the news organization knows? That's also, I think, incredibly important in breaking news, because the situation can change. And what appeared to be the facts at one point may turn out not to be exactly what was right. But if you've attributed it, the police chief said this, circumstances changed, and now the police chief says that. We touched on this earlier. Does the story raise questions that it doesn't answer? It should not do that. And either something needs to be satisfied or eliminated, I suppose. And you said this, that you can't, we're throwing a lot of things out there. You can't do it all in 20 minutes. So what do? Maybe you just spot check 1 or 2 or 3 points to get a sense of how the things are tracking the way they should. And you pick out the obvious places where mistakes can be made. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think it's really important, the editor's perspective, to look at all the information in a story with a completely open mind. And in fact, walk in thinking, maybe the lead is buried. Maybe the lead, which reflects what the reporter thought was good, is no longer justified by the facts. Story itself. So you're always looking for that element that's in the narrative that this should be the lead, or at least deep down.
I also like to, dovetails off that. I like to edit very transparently with the reporter, and sometimes in a grading situation it becomes a little more difficult. But I think having a reporter be able to see every single change, like I love using Google Docs and doing suggestion mode, so that the reporter can flag immediately if my suggestion misunderstands the source, and there's a better way to clarify it. I also think that doing a transparent edit helps editors check themselves a little bit, because my job is not to change when we say something. Right. My job is to make sure that we have more clarity here, but it should still be in your voice as a reporter, right? So I think there has to be a sense of restraint too. You should if you're sometimes I think when editors are edit without that transparency, maybe they're a little more aggressive, and it sort of is like, let me make this sound like me.
Right. I think that's an excellent point. And I'll add to that. being transparent with your edits builds trust with your reporter. And also, you pretty much said this, but when a story is nuanced, it's easy to tweak a sentence and lose that nuance. And the reporter is the one who's going to understand that they said something in a very specific way for a very specific reason.
How many times have I heard that? I put that in there for a reason.
With that, I'm going to open it up to questions.
We have to do hot mess.
Okay, so
All right, editors.
hot mess.
The stories that come in, and you've been handed a hot mess. How can editors protect their news organizations, themselves, and their reporters? You got it.
I actually like the hot messes sometimes, because I think a puzzle can be really, really fun. And I think sometimes we've all as reporters filed stories that we know that it's a hot mess. Like we know it needs work, right? Like most of us don't file it, and then the editor says this doesn't work. That us kind of having a sense that it doesn't work. So I think that it's that moment to take a breath. It's a moment to have a conversation. Maybe it's to get outside, take a walk. Breaking news situation again. You don't always have this, but I think the hot mess story that an editor tackles is usually not in a breaking situation. That's more like get the facts out, traditional AP style. But drawing out what's important about the story, what is notable. I think committing as an editor to read through the entire draft without making any edits. There.
That's an excellent idea.
I think there's just a few different things. Also fresh eyes sometimes.
And just pause on that, because that is really hard to do when things are happening fast, to make yourself read top to bottom before you change anything. Because you, the editor, you're feeling pressure too. Somebody's probably breathing down your neck to get that out there. But it's so, so important to give it that read.
A lot of times the hot mess is hot mess because the reporter stopped knowing what had to be in the story and what didn't have to be in the story. So they've put everything in the story. And it's not necessarily organized in a way that tells you what's really important. So the editor's job is to look at, okay, what's really essential to tell this story? And what does the need?
And I'll just the one thing, and then we'll open for questions. You had said it really well, I think. It comes in, and let's say we are talking about breaking news. The safest thing perhaps you can do is to trim it way back. The less there is, the less risk there is. So just get the nuggets you absolutely need, and you can pile up that longer for the next one.
Less there is. I love that. That's really important. I just wanted to open it up to questions before we go out to our breakout.
Hello, I'm Paige in the South Jersey Emerging Journalist Project in Fort Myers, New Jersey. I have a question because I'm a new reporter, and I'm not so used to the dynamic between editors and reporters and how that relationship works and what's appropriate or not. So if you have an editor that, let's say, is not so transparent with their edits, and is a little bit more like just does it themselves and publishes it, or there's not too much back and forth. Is it appropriate for a reporter to then, like, kind of request that kind of transparency? And if so, how do they go about that? How should we with that?
I would say I appreciate what you've done here. Can you just explain why?
So it should have been a
And just self going.
yeah. I mean, I'll confess, I as my editors, I'm sure would be thrilled to out me on. I have been a real pill about that, and I don't feel bad about it at all. And what I typically say is I need to see the read back before it's published. And I think you can ask that very respectfully. It doesn't have to be combative, but it's just a reasonable thing for the reporter to read the edited copy before the button gets pushed.
Yeah, and keep an open mind with that explanation that the editor might hopefully give you. to change your, to try to learn what do they really want you to take away from. That's what you should be asking. What do you want me to take away from changes so that I don't have to be so edited? Yeah.
The read back is very important because sometimes editors can introduce errors that weren't in the story.
That's the most egregious or way too long. Skill. But I just have an unequivocal yes. Speak up. And I think like don't make it be an imposition, but say I want to learn. Like I want to see the changes because I want to learn from each one of them. I don't want to have to like do my own side by side comparison.
Lana. But I just want to say something because I was editor for many years, but I was also a reporter. And one thing that doesn't happen very often now because of the way people work and everything's electronic, that you don't have to side by side edits, which I love that. Sometimes I would sit next to my editor and I would see them editing my story and I would be horrified. Sometimes like, oh my God, they changed that, they changed that. And that was honestly, that was the way that I really learned how to turn a very clean copy that met their expectations. But I do think it's really important for a reporter to take what they've turned in and then look at the finished result and to study that and to understand on their own what happened and what changed. And if you have questions about that, bring constructive questions about it. Or say to your editor, hey, I noticed you did this, but why did you do this? Or I noticed you did this, thank you. And really figure out what those things are that you might need to improve upon. Now, in some cases, you might have a bad editor. And sometimes that happens too. Or you might get to a point where you advance to beyond your editor's skill. That happened to me on my first job. I learned a lot, but in a few months, I had advanced. And there was only so much that I could get there. So I changed jobs. I mean, it was really that simple. I knew I needed to go somewhere that had a more um that had a just a culture of strong editing. And I was fortunate to be able to do that. But I think too often reporters don't go back and do those comparisons and really study what happened.
I think that's a really good point. I think a reason for being sure you get the read back, and in addition to what Jen said, is that I don't think the reporter should feel surprised by what is written under their name, what is published under their name.
Yeah.
And I think too, as Falana is saying, that you should learn from what the editor has done, what changes they've made. But you want to be comfortable with it, and you don't want to open your publication or call it up and be shocked at what's being your name.
Yeah, to Jim's point, you don't want to open it up and say, "Oh my God, he made it wrong."
But that's the accuracy piece, and that's super important. But sometimes it's structure. Sometimes you're using too many adverbs. Sometimes it's just your descriptions are you're going too far with things. And that might not be something that you can ever on deadline. That's when you're in a fast-paced environment, sometimes the accuracy piece is the thing that you really have to focus in on.
Right.
Hi, I'm Catherine Sparrow. I'm actually with Tap Into. I have a question about headlines. I feel like I think some of your competitors say a headline and then repeat that as the first sentence to the story. I find that frustrating. Is it a new trend? Is it worth doing? Do you see that sometimes?
I don't. I mean, I'm not an expert headline writer, but I would say that should not happen.
Right. That's how I feel. I feel like it's not. So I guess the question is how to structure a headline so that it gives that first topical sentence or topical paragraph without giving it all away. That's a full workshop.
Stuff. It would be. I would attend. That would be really interesting. But I mean, the short version is that the headline should be really short and really punchy, and ideally, you accomplish one of the things that you didn't accomplish in the headline, in the lead, right? Like maybe you give a little spin forward, or you provide a little extra context of how say if it's a back to a transit thing,
the headline's not going to say this third fire in a Penn Station tunnel in 3 months, like, because that's too much of a headline, but that can be in the lead.
Yeah,
You know, the elements that repeat, but not the same.
you know, the lead's got to provide additional context.
What are your thoughts about ever-changing headlines, like multiple times editing the headlines, not because of new information, but because of search engine optimization by whoever's posting it online? Is that a common practice now, or you just have to?
First, so as we had mentioned, most recently I was science bureau chief of Wall Street Journal, and we were encouraged under the latest management to look at how the stories were performing. And I really don't remember now all the specific metrics, but there was one metric that would sort of flag you that the problem was the headline. And if you believed that was the case, then you could go to the desk and actually brainstorm with the SEO people to say, I think this is a great story, it's underperforming, can you help me tweak that outline? And they would do that, like you could want to see if that you didn't change it repeatedly. But there were times when you could see a dramatic difference. So I can tell you that that was happening for that reason when you thought that the story wasn't getting the attention it deserved and the problem might be in it. So we had a dashboard of metrics to look at.
Hi, Sophia Stephanie Freelance. I recently just graduated just earlier. And the rise of AI has been a really big topic of conversation. And I was just curious as editors, what your perspectives are on AI kind of embedding itself into journalism. I feel as though there's been some classes where it's like, let's do SEO generators and using AI like power website. I've had other professors where like, if you touch this, I will fail. So I don't know what your thoughts are.
Who wants to go first?
I could go first.
Loaded questions.
No, I mean it's an important question. That's a very current question.
And I'm surprised at the questions we got in advance. Nobody asked.
So I'll tell you what I really strongly disagree with. There are a lot of people out there that are saying human in the loop. We need to make sure there's always a human in the loop. I could not disagree more with that. It has to be a human in charge, like full stop. And so I think like if we think of AI as a tool that can help us identify stories quicker, trends quicker, crunch data, look at like sets of documents that we couldn't analyze quickly before. In my class, it's the business of media. And so I use an AI model to look at every publicly traded media company and compare their 10Ks and like suggest story ideas. I mean, so I think there's all sorts of really exciting journalism that can be assisted with AI, but I think it fundamentally can't be positioned as a let's replace skepticism and the journalistic process because like we've all used these models. Like try asking an AI like for its sources. It'll start like falling apart. It's about no, I don't know. I must have mistaken. So I think we have to not be afraid of it on one hand, but also read about like what are the tools, what are the applications, and as editors, we were talking about this over lunch. Like as editors, I think we have to retool some of the approaches to stories because, you know, and if we suspect that some reporter is potentially using AI assistance, you have to be very careful too. There's a lot of embarrassing moments.
Can I comment on that real quick? Because I'm like really close to this. And I talk to a lot of publishers who are worried about the same thing, a lot of students, a lot of journalists. And I think the beautiful thing about the journalistic process and something that we have to remember is that it doesn't matter where or how a story or text appears in front of your desk, whether it comes from a fucking magic wand or a bot or a freelancer or a longtime staff writer. As a publication, your job is to verify and be able to stand by and defend whatever comes through that gate and makes its way under your banner out to the public. And if you can't guarantee that, and if you're not willing to put in the process, and to be fair, the cognitive burden, whether it's open source software maintainers, journalists, editors, publishers, grant submissions, RFPs, the cognitive burden has certainly shifted. It takes 2 seconds to generate a bunch of bullshit and submit it. And there's really almost no downside. It takes a lot longer. What takes 15 seconds to generate can take hours and hours to verify. But if you're not able to, and you're not willing to stand by what you publish, no matter where it comes from or how it's created, then that's where you lose your credibility. And that's where you go from being a a journalism organization, a news organization, a publication of renown and respect, to a pass through for slop. So again, that's the thing that, and what I say is beautiful about journalism, is that the systems for verification and making sure what we're putting out is not nonsense are there. They're under strain, but they're there. And even when the tool, because what if the tools, and I would say most people, when they say, oh, that they can't cite their sources, you guys aren't working with the same, terminal level, the $200 max plans, whatever. Like, there are harnesses you can put. And what if the bots can cite their sources? What happens when that's the case? What happens when it can find real answers and stuff? Do we say, oh no, I'm going to redo that work manually and miss the whatever? So it really has nothing to do with the capabilities of the tools. It has to do with the strength and the solidified processes that are in place and the backstops to make sure that what you put out and put your name and your publication on, you can stand by it and stand behind it.
It's a great point. I know there's one last question before our breakout.
Ken Simmons would tap into. My question has to do with the use of the word allegedly. What are your views on that versus simply citing a reputable source? Let's say a police said, as opposed to the suspect allegedly.
At some point, before you use the word allegedly, have to cite the source. Whether the word allegedly is in there or in that sentence, it comes up later, but it's a signal that you've already provided the source who's made the accusation. Police source, prosecutor, whatever. But I don't think you can. You have to keep the word allegedly when the message is, this is unverified. It's only a charge. It's not a fact. Okay.
Does it have to be the word allegedly? Maybe there are other language choices, but if someone is simply accused of something and it hasn't been proven yet that they did whatever the thing was, you have to acknowledge that that's all it is at this stage. And with proper attribution.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.